Senator Hagerty.
If the chairman might accommodate me to go outside of the 5-minute limit for a minute, because I'd love to, this is a very healthy conversation, and to share my perspective on it. One, my conversation with Chairman Gensler really has to do with transparency and disclosure regarding the advisory firms, not whether or not you can hire them, but transparency in terms of what these firms do. These firms not only work for the T. Rowe Prices in your example, they also can work for activist investors, and they can be deployed to go out and put proposals in place that suit the desires of those activist investors. In fact, activists are in the ownership structure of these offshore firms. It's a duopoly. Two firms, they say, control 97% of the proxy advisory services. I don't know who the other 3% are controlled by, but these two large firms. In my own private sector experience, I've dealt with these firms. As a member of a New York Stock Exchange traded company, experienced a proposal recommending against management. And what happens next is a phone call comes to management saying that our consulting arm, I'm sure there's a Chinese wall there, but our consulting arm will help you get to a better answer. And after paying hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions of dollars in consulting fees, you can get the proposal recommendation for management as opposed to when it was against it. And as I mentioned, there are even circumstances where these firms are recommending for actions that if management were to take them would cause them to violate state or federal laws. So there is a real problem. I think this goes back to our whole discussion about the volume of rules coming down the pike and trying to deal with the proposals that are now so easy to issue. As I mentioned earlier, the Harvard Law School study indicated that there are 5 individuals that are launching over 40% of all these proposals. They're easy to do, and they're just inundating companies with this. And I think there needs to be, I think we should take a hard look at how these proxy proposals are put forward too. This is outside the realm of the advisors, but boy, they generate a lot of business for the advisors. Thanks for that diversion, but I think that's a healthy conversation for all of us to have, and that's where my concern lies. To come back to some questions I wanted to discuss with you, Chairman Gensler, I'd like to come back to crypto and the blockchain technology markets for a moment. In your conversations with Senator Durbin, you talked about a robust set of rules that you have, a robust set of tools, I should say, that you have to deal with this. What I've seen happen just this year alone is that U.S. share of stablecoin volume has gone down. U.S. blockchain developers' jobs have decreased here in America. And I think what's happening is that industry players are migrating overseas to other jurisdictions where the rules of the road are clearer for them. And when you think about the rules of the road here in America, the rule set is anything but clear. And what is occurring here much more often than not is regulation by enforcement, if you will. And I think that's creating a great deal of uncertainty in the market. What worries me is that we're losing out on technology development and innovation that I would like to see happening here. And I think it might make your job more challenging as I think about your conversation with Senator Kennedy, because the company that he's concerned about, FTX, is a Bahamian company. It's not an American company. And these companies like FTX are searching for jurisdictions that probably allow them to do what they want to do. The question I raise is, if we had a robust rule set here, would we have the ability to attract the illicit actors to operate here in the United States of America? And is there a way to put clarity? I mean, I'd be interested in your concerns on that.
So I actually think there are robust rule sets at the Securities and Exchange Commission, and it's outside of our jurisdiction, but over at the Treasury Department and Anti-Money Laundering and Financial Crimes Enforcement Network and so forth.
Yet these firms are moving offshore.
Yeah, because this is a field that in part is built on a business model of catch us if you can. It's built in part, not everybody, but in part on a model of preying upon the investing public's desire for a better life and future and the hype around these tokens, these 15 or 20,000 tokens. And like most of venture capital, and I know, Senator, I respect you were in the venture capital field, most venture capital investments fail, just statistically. So many of these tokens, you know, if you think of them like startups, are likely to fail. And yet they're not making full, fair, and truthful disclosures to the investing public. And you're absolutely right, there's a bit of regulatory arbitrage. I'll set up in Malta, I'll set up in the Bahamas, I'll set up in some tax haven or offshore where they don't have the robust rules of the road that we have in our securities markets or the robust enforcement we might have around anti-money laundering.
To come back to the timing here, because I have just a couple more questions to touch on, and we're running short. I would just strongly encourage, rather than regulating via enforcement, to think through the rule set that would create clarity here in the marketplace. Because when I talk to market participants, they tell me that there is a lack of clarity here, and that's, I think, a laudable goal to achieve. I've got a couple of other quick points. One of them goes back to what Senator Coons touched on in terms of not getting a response back, what I mentioned myself in terms of not getting responses back, fulsome responses back from the SEC when we send questions in. And this comes back to specifically 2 letters that you received from House Committee Chairman McHenry, Jordan, and Comer, Chairmans McHenry, Jordan, and Comer, asking about providing specific certifications regarding any use by you or your direct reports or personnel there at the SEC using their own personal, either off-channel or off-platform methods to communicate or conduct SEC business. I'm talking about personal phones, using Signal, WhatsApp, those types of communications. In your written response to the first letter, you talk about the operation, you mention a number of areas, but you don't specifically respond directly to the 5 clear requests that were made in the SEC off-platform letter that came forward. And it includes providing specific certifications regarding the SEC's and your personal compliance with federal record-keeping requirements. So I think those requests are straightforward. I think it would be appropriate to address those, and I would just ask you now, have you yourself been involved in using your personal device or off-platform devices for SEC business?
I've disclosed here, I think Senator Van Hollen still might call me on my cell phone. I've known him for 23 years. But when I get such phone calls...
about the concern that was raised by...
No, I don't use... I occasionally, it's very rare these days, but I occasionally get an email from somebody, and then I just forward it over to the SEC.
I would just encourage you to please respond to these questions. Again, I express the same frustration that my colleagues do in that regard. I think a response would be warranted there. One last area I'll touch on, and then I'll deal with the rest of this through questions for the record. When you were speaking with Senator Collins about work from home, when you and I talked about this yesterday, it raises a question of what the impact might be on your office footprint. And there's been a lot of news related to the GSA announcement on your new headquarters lease. I've seen different estimates for the cost of that lease to the taxpayer. But what would you expect over the next, do you have an estimate of what the next 25 years of that building cost would be?
I think we need to get back to you, but I would say this, that our needed footprint has come down from when that was initially put out for a request for quote. Now I think it was 4 years ago. It was pre-COVID.
The lease was signed though after COVID.
We've actually worked with the General Services Administration and said, and we had a right under our agreement with GSA, we had a right to downsize with them, and we did about a year ago downsize with GSA. But we'd have to get back to you on the specific question about dollars.
Again, just thinking about the expense of these buildings, and as you described, a very different sort of work pattern, I would think that would have an implication on the...
We're actually looking at it across all 12 of our offices, and where we can to prudently and thoughtfully shed space.
Well, what if I could work with you, if your staff could work with mine to just get us any sort of internal analyses that you've done, any fair pricing analysis that you've done, I'd very much appreciate that. I'll
ask staff to coordinate with yours. Sure. And some of this information is over at GSA and not ours, but
okay. Thanks for coordinating with us on that, and I'll submit the rest of my questions for the record. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.